The moment Laura Bennett realized her life could still surprise her happened on an ordinary Tuesday, under fluorescent office lights. With a sentence she was not prepared to hear, "You don't look like someone who's done dreaming." The words came from across the conference table.com and respectful, yet they landed with a quiet force. Laura looked up, caught off guard. The room went still for half a second, just long enough for her heart to respond before her mind could stop it. She was 46 years old, married, established, careful, and the man who had spoken was Ethan Miller, 25, new to Seattle, new to the company, and completely unaware of the invisible line he had just stepped near. Laura smiled politely, the kind of smile she had practiced for years. "We should get back to the agenda," she said, steady and professional. The meeting moved on, but something had already shifted. From the outside, Laura's life looked solid. She had a senior role at a tech firm, a quiet house in the suburbs, and a husband who paid the bills on time and remembered birthdays. Her days followed patterns that felt safe, predictable, controlled. What no one saw was the silence inside her. She wasn't unhappy. That word felt too strong. She was simply faded. Around the edges, like a photograph left too long in the sun. Over the years, her dreams had been replaced by responsibilities. Her voice, once bold, had learned when to soften. Ethan joined the team in early spring. He was sharp but not loud, confident but not careless. He listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, it was thoughtful. He didn't interrupt. He didn't rush. On his first day, Laura noticed how he thanked the receptionist by name. Later, she noticed how he asked questions in meetings that showed he had truly read the material. These were small things. They shouldn't have mattered, but they did. Their work required collaboration, and collaboration required conversation. At first, it was all business: deadlines, tasks, timelines. Then came the pauses after meetings. The extra comments, the shared humor when a project went sideways. Ethan laughed easily, but not loudly. Laura found herself responding before she thought. Her wit returning like a muscle, remembered. One afternoon, the coffee machine broke down. Laura muttered under her breath, already tired. A few minutes later, Ethan appeared at her desk with a cup from the cafe down the street. "No sugar, right?" he said. She stared at the cup. "How did you know?" "You mentioned it once," he replied, as if it were nothing. It wasn't nothing that night. Laura drove home thinking about how long it had been since someone noticed details without being asked. Mark, her husband, greeted her with a quick kiss and went back to his laptop. Dinner was eaten in front of the TV. The news droned on. The day ended without a single question about how she felt. Laura told herself not to compare. Comparison was dangerous. Days passed. Weeks moved forward. Spring became summer. The office grew warmer, lighter. So did the conversations. One late afternoon, a deadline kept most of the team late. By the time the work was done, only Laura and Ethan remained. The office lights dimmed automatically, leaving the room washed in soft shadows. "Long day," Ethan said, stretching his arms. "They all are," Laura replied, rubbing her temples. There was a pause. Then he spoke again, quieter this time. "Can I ask you something?" She hesitated, then nodded. Double quotes, "Do you ever feel like your life was decided for you before you knew how to decide for yourself?" The question hit her harder than she expected. Laura leaned back in her chair, eyes fixed on the dark window. Her reflection stared back, older than she felt, younger than she acted. "Yes," she said slowly. "I do." Ethan didn't smile. He didn't fill the silence. He just nodded as if he understood. That was the moment Laura knew this was no longer harmless. She went home unsettled, her thoughts racing. She noticed how quiet the house felt, how Mark spoke about work without looking at her, how she nodded at the right moments, just as she had learned to do that night. Sleep didn't come easily. At work the next day, Laura tried to pull back. She kept conversations short. She avoided eye contact. She reminded herself of the age difference, the marriage, the consequences. But emotion doesn't respond to logic. Ethan noticed the shift. He didn't confront her. He didn't push. He simply gave her space, which somehow made everything louder. A week later, they were assigned to prepare a presentation together. It meant meetings, planning, shared hours. Laura considered asking for reassignment, but stopped herself. That would raise questions. She told herself she could handle it. They worked efficiently, focused, but something had changed. Every glance carried weight. Every silence spoke. During one meeting, Laura mentioned her early career. How she once wanted to write, to create things that mattered beyond reports and budgets. "You should have," Ethan said simply. She laughed softly. Life had other plans. Life still does, he replied. The words stayed with her as days passed. Laura began to feel awake in a way she hadn't felt in years. Not reckless, not foolish, just present. She noticed colors more sharply. Music felt richer. Even the city looked different, and that scared her. She began to understand what was happening, even if she refused to name it. This wasn't about romance, it was about being seen. It was about remembering who she had been before she learned how to disappear into responsibility. One evening, as rain fell steadily outside, Laura and Ethan finished their work and packed up in silence. At the elevator, he stopped. "Laura," he said, "if I ever cross a line, tell me. I don't want to be that person." Her throat tightened. "You haven't," she said, even though part of her knew that wasn't entirely true. The elevator. Doors closed. She watched the numbers light up as they descended, her heart pounding for reasons she couldn't explain. At home, Mark talked about a promotion opportunity. Laura congratulated him, smiled, poured wine. Inside, she felt distant. Like she was watching her own life from the outside. She began to realize that the most dangerous thing about Ethan wasn't his age or his attention. It was the mirror he held up to her life. Weeks later, a company announcement came through. Laura and Ethan would be traveling together for a client meeting in Canada. Just one night. Standard procedure. Laura read the email twice, then closed her laptop. She stood by the window, watching the city glow as evening fell, knowing that something was approaching. Not a scandal, not a mistake, but a moment. And moments, she knew now, were powerful enough to change everything, even if nothing ever happened at all. The plane lifted off the runway, and Laura felt a strange mix of anticipation and unease. Vancouver in late autumn was always cold, the streets slick with rain, lights reflecting off wet pavement like liquid gold. She had flown for business hundreds of times, but this time it felt different. Ethan Miller was on the same flight, seated 2 rows ahead, quietly reviewing his notes. Oblivious to the way her heart kept catching at the sight of him, she told herself it was just professionalism, that she could keep her distance. Distance had never felt so close. From the moment they landed, everything moved fast. Taxi rides, hotel check-ins, and client meetings that seemed routine but felt charged with an invisible energy. Ethan was calm and efficient, as always, but there were glances exchanged when they thought no one was watching. Small gestures, handing her a pen without being asked, making sure her coffee was just right. Walking beside her on slippery streets that carried weight she hadn't realized she'd been missing. Each act was subtle, respectful, and yet it reminded her of how lonely her own life had become. The client meeting was exactly as expected, polished, professional, and over in an hour. They shook hands with smiles and polite nods. Laura felt a pang of relief at how smoothly it had gone. She expected professionalism to be a shield, but when they left the conference room, the city outside seemed louder, brighter, more alive. They walked through downtown Vancouver, the streets almost empty. Rain fell gently, and the city's lights bounced in puddles at their feet. Laura zipped her coat tighter, trying to focus on the uneven pavement rather than on him. "You don't," Talk much about yourself, Ethan said suddenly, his voice breaking the quiet rhythm of their steps. Laura laughed softly, trying to sound casual. There's not much to tell. I'm just me. He shook his head. I don't believe that. I think you stopped telling it. The words caught her off guard. She paused, glanced at him, and realized he wasn't teasing, wasn't joking. He was serious, honest. His eyes weren't searching for flirtation, they were searching for truth. I should go, she said softly, the words almost fragile. Not a command, not a rejection, just a recognition of the invisible line between them. I know, he replied. He didn't move, didn't pressure her. His presence alone was enough to make the air feel heavier. They didn't touch. They didn't need to. It wasn't about crossing a line, it was about understanding that the line even existed. Aye. Laura realized that attraction could be quiet, subtle, more dangerous because it didn't shout. It whispered. It lingered in a glance, a shared laugh, a knowing silence. They talked about their lives, not deeply personal confessions, not secrets that would ruin anyone's day, but honest, simple truths. She spoke about the dreams she had abandoned, the writing she never pursued, the energy she had spent trying to be perfect. He spoke about feeling lost despite seeming capable, about wanting to make a mark in the world but struggling to find the path. The conversation wasn't romantic in the traditional sense. It wasn't stolen kisses or flirtatious gestures. It was connection, recognition to people from different stages of life, realizing that someone was finally listening without judgment, without expectation. By the time they returned to the hotel, Laura felt a tension in her chest that was unfamiliar. Not guilt, not shame, not excitement, just awareness. Awareness of her own life, of choices made, of emotions long ignored. Ethan knocked lightly on her door before leaving for his own room. She opened it briefly. They shared a quiet nod, a look. That said more than words ever could. Then the door closed. That night, Laura lay awake. The room was silent except for the hum of the heater and the distant sounds of traffic outside. She thought about her husband, Mark, at home, probably oblivious to the intensity of the simple connection she had just experienced. She thought about Ethan, asleep in the room next door, likely feeling the same mixture of emotion and restraint. She realized that attraction was only part of the story. Respect, honesty, and the courage to not cross a line were just as powerful. The next morning, the return flight to Seattle brought clarity. Laura and Ethan barely spoke on the plane. Words weren't necessary. The distance between seats reminded. Then that some boundaries needed to remain. She thought about the entire trip and understood the truth. This experience wouldn't change their lives in dramatic ways. It wouldn't disrupt marriages or careers, but it would change them quietly, subtly, in ways they carried with them long after. 2 weeks later, Ethan submitted his transfer request to another branch of the company. Laura felt a pang of something she couldn't name, loss relief, something in between. On his last day, he left a simple note on her desk. Some moments change us, even if they never become more. Laura read the note, folded it carefully, and placed it in her bag. She didn't feel regret. She didn't feel longing. She felt clarity. She understood that connection wasn't always about possession. Sometimes it was about recognition, about remembering who you were beneath the routines and responsibilities in the months that followed. Laura noticed small changes in herself. She started writing again, short stories at first, then longer pieces. She laughed more freely, noticing humor in everyday life instead of stifling it for propriety's sake. She paid attention to moments she might have overlooked before. The sound of rain on her window, the way sunlight hit the kitchen in the morning, the expression of a friend sharing a story over coffee. Ethan remained a quiet memory in the office, a presence that didn't vanish completely, but settled into the corners of her mind where it belonged. Laura never crossed boundaries. She never jeopardized her life or her marriage. Instead, she allowed herself to awaken, to feel, to notice, to live more fully within the life she already had. Years later, She would think back on that trip, on the rain-soaked streets of Vancouver, on quiet conversations and small gestures. She would remember the way connection could be powerful without being dangerous. The way honesty could be thrilling without being reckless. And she would smile at the memory, grateful for the awakening. Grateful for the lesson that some of the most meaningful stories in life are those that end before they begin. Leaving behind insight instead of regret, because once you've felt truly seen, even briefly, you can never go back to living unseen. And sometimes the most profound changes are quiet, subtle, and completely unexpected. Laura learned that at 46, life could still surprise her. And sometimes the most important moments are not the ones we chase, they are the ones we recognize, respect, and carry forward quietly, like a secret gift we give ourselves.